So I'm Jeff Spiegel, sometimes called Jeffoir, and the work I do here is primarily with different kinds of paint and other mediums. So I work a lot on canvases. I've also gotten into doing some woodworking, doing some trestle tables, and making some wood sculptures. If I was to kind of categorize the kind of art that I do, I would say I'm an eclectic. I like combining different mediums, found objects from nature, whatever, and just kind of interacting with them in a way in which somehow in that process a piece of work gets developed. My sister is an accomplished artist, and honestly, I was always envious of her. I went into education. I became a school principal, a teacher, special educator, and was always wanting to dabble in the arts, and kind of always felt like, God, I wish I was a creative person. And then I had an opportunity of being in a kind of an interesting group that would meet once every other month for a weekend. And in that opportunity, we were often given some creative activities to do. And it was this one evening where we were given a piece of large canvas and crayons, which are oily pastels. And we were asked to listen to the music and simply follow our hands and draw whatever. And this is in a group of 20 to 25 people. I was petrified. It took me a while just to get engaged. When I was finally done, what I had created it looked like a giant ear to me. The facilitator said that she was going to collect everybody's work, and while we all left for the evening, she would hang it up, and the next day, she just said two things. One, find your work. Two, notice your reaction when you find it. And during the next day, we would always have our interactive activities in that same room, and I would look around, and for most of the day I could not find my drawing. But at one point we were sitting waiting for the next activity to begin, and I remember leaning over and saying, "Do you know who did that one over there?" And they said no, and I said, "Yeah, neither do I, but I'd like to. I'm curious, because that's a very strange person." And that evening, when we met again for the final session, the lighting was the same, and we were waiting to begin, and I just casually looked up and I saw that painting that was belonging to someone weird, and I immediately, my face just got hot. I realized I was the weird person. So for the next couple of days, that weekend, actually for 2 more days, and that we had a longer weekend, I didn't go to any of the sessions. Instead, I stayed in my room with the crayons. And after the first day, people were wondering where I was, and they came up, a couple of them, and wondered what was going on, and they saw all the work that I just would put up on the wall and keep going. And they said, "You got to bring this down. You got to show this." So that was really my beginning. But at the time, I was a school principal, and I really had no special time that I could set aside for art. Except when we would go to Willoughby Lake in the summer for a couple of weeks, I would bring paints. And that's really the only time until I retired. And we used to have animals here on the farm. And I thought it would be nice to bring animals back onto the property. We had just cut down all this ash and cherry, and for 3 days we sawed off posts and beams. We hired a timber framer, and he came and took them all to his mill after we had them kiln dried. And when he brought the structure back and put up this structure, I looked at it and I said, David, it's absolutely beautiful, but it's not a barn. And I remember my wife saying, oh, we could put horses in here. And I said, no, no animals are going in here. So this became the workshop and the painting studio for me. And we started calling this Prince, the building formerly known as the barn. So that really is what opened up the world of art for me, because now I had a space, I had the time, and the motivation. And it's been a great, great journey. Yeah. I would always say, I paint from here. And I do, I trust that. I trust that that's part of letting go of my concrete reality and getting lost in the work. And I remember someone saying, follow your hands. And I actually taught my students when I was working at a technical high school. I would incorporate painting into our work in terms of analyzing what we do in our program. And I remember telling my students, after I put them through the same experience of collecting their work, hanging it up, and then watching them the next day trying to figure out what is theirs. And the words that I heard were, I can't believe I did that, I don't believe I did that, or some would say, I'm not sure which one I did. So that's the way I think art works for me. It's trusting my unconscious mind. And when I start to work and look too critically, I know that it's time to step away. The most difficult thing that I learned in the first couple of years that I got serious about painting was knowing when to stop, when to let go, or when just to walk away. So I'm getting better at that because there's always that creeping judgment that's going to sneak in, and that gets in the way of losing what it was that I was actually doing when I was interacting with whatever material I was using. So that's the long answer to, yeah, I guess I'm a semi-abstract kind of guy. So by way of coming here and discovering Corinth was an interesting journey. I was teaching in Harlem at the time and had a girlfriend who had a little Carmen Ghia. And it was fall, and she said, how about if we go to Vermont to see the foliage? And I said, what's the foliage? I had no clue. And when we came up here, we came actually pretty close to this area, and I was knocked out. It just touched me. So I came back to New York and saw all my friends and said, I've seen my future. I'm going to buy an old 200-year-old farmhouse that I can restore in Vermont by June. And they all thought I was crazy. And I started coming up here looking around, and ultimately I wound up in a broker's office in Newbury. And she said, so what are you looking for? And I had never really put it together, and that's the kind of synchronistic, or I don't know what you would call it, moment in my life when I just said, I want a 200-year-old farmhouse I can restore. I want it on a dirt road with a stream in front. I want it on 10 acres of land, and I don't want to pay more than $10,000. And the very first place she took me to was here. And I'm thinking, there's no way I can buy the very first house that I have been shown. So I spent the next couple of months all over looking, and ultimately on May 24th of that year, I bought this place. This was where I needed to be. So coming here was spiritual. That first year when I was living here by myself, I just needed to put my hands in the dirt, in the ground. I had a huge garden, and it just felt like this was where I needed to be. And of course, over the years, I went from being a classroom teacher to a special educator to eventually being a school principal. And part of the challenge was that my work took me away from my community. And it wasn't until I left teaching in New Hampshire that I said, I want to come back to Vermont. So I went back to the classroom and taught for 7 years at the Hartford Tech Center, teaching human services. And then my family basically said, you know, you're not getting any younger. You got a lot of projects going on here. You need to simplify things. So I did, I retired, but I felt like now it was time for me to give back to the community. And wasn't sure what that was until I learned more about what this community needed for help. And I did some research on that and talked to organizations that were helping people in this town that we had no clue in terms of what their needs were and what was going on. And it was 2 months before the pandemic was when I formed a small group called the Corinth Community Coalition, and made a presentation at the town meeting that March. And then 2 weeks after the pandemic hit, and I was getting phone calls. And at that point, I called the select board and said, hello, we got to get going here. And since that time, we've done some really good things for people in this community. And the thing that I think has impressed me the most is the people who have stepped up. This is a wonderful community. This is my home, and I'm at a point in my life where we've had discussions about the end of my life and how I want that to be. And I've chosen green burial. I want to be here. This is where I belong. This is where I want to leave by renewing this place in some small way. I feel like in many ways I grew up in a different way by living here. And even though I know that this is an interesting stage in my life in terms of my perspective on the past as well as the present and the future, as I said to somebody just a couple of weeks ago, I feel like I'm thriving. I'm thriving in my relationship to where I am, my relationship to my spouse, my partner and my family, my relationship to those closest to me, and my relationship to my community. And I'm a happy guy, and I just look forward to, more of exploring what's here and what's here. So that's pretty much it.